And so it is. Welcome to CSS. All right. So let's talk about where CSS fits into this whole full stack picture. So we got this client. I've got this server. This is the browser. This is Rails. So we know a little bit about how to make these two things talk to each other. We don't have all the like JavaScript stuff in place yet, but browser is going to make an HTTP request to Rails. Rails is going to give it an HTTP response. And this is how we get data back and forth. We can add dogs, we can get dogs, we can do whatever. We just want some data. We've got an idea of how that works. So there's another part to this. So this is an API. It's not the only kind of server there is out there. There's also such a thing as a file server. So client is going to ask for a file, get a file back. Still HTTP, but this is HTTP get request for index.html. And then what it gets back is the contents of that file. Cool. So as it's going down that file, we can also ask for other files. We can ask for JavaScript files. We can also ask for CSS files. So when it hits that link tag in the HTML, cool. Can you give me app.css? Cool. Here goes. And then you get whatever the stuff in that body is. Okay, so that's like where this sort of fits into our big picture full stack flow. Before I move on, ask me some questions about that. It's kind of trippy. Cool.
Can you explain just a little bit about right after the HTML content from the file server?
Yep. Tell you what, let's all go through this together. So I'm gonna start a new app. I want everybody to follow along. Let's take a look at how these things work. All right, so I want you to make a new folder. We're gonna call this window blinds. I've already done that one. I was like looking at window blinds in front of me right now, so you call it whatever you want, doesn't matter. And then I want you to make an index.html. You can do that with a touch command. I want you to make an app.css file. So you should have 2 empty files in a folder. So even with what we have right now, we can serve this up. You run light dash server, should see something kind of like that. And if you pull up the dev tools in your browser, and go over to the network tab, okay, these are all the things that we asked for. And this first thing we asked for, it says localhost here, that was our GET request to our file server. What file server? That file server. That's what Light Server does, is it turns any folder on your computer into a file server. So this is saying if you go to localhost 3000, if you don't put anything else in, it assumes that the file you're asking for is called index.html. So watch this. I'll split screen it so you can see. Okay, take a look at this area in the lower left-hand corner here when I refresh this page. I made a GET request for index.html. I didn't write it out here. That would be like that. Because if you don't put anything, it assumes you're asking for a file called index.html. And then it gave a 300 response. 300 response are redirects, because we got a 200 over here. 304 is like, just use the one you have from cache. It's the same shit, it hasn't changed. Cool. Next step, we want to ask for that CSS file in the HTML file. So I want you to kill your server if you started it. And I want you to open up that index.html file, and we're going to put some HTML boilerplate in there. Do the absolute minimum to make a valid HTML document, which is that doc type. So I actually need to say what the doc type is. That helps. Come on, man. Like that. Has a head and a body. In the head, we need a title. And we need a meta charset tag. And then, so that's, all of this is the bare minimum to make something a legal HTML document. It'll probably work if you don't have these, but that's your browser cleaning up for your mistakes. At a minimum, every HTML document has to at least have this stuff. Now, if we want to see anything, we probably also want to add something in the body. So with just this here, I should be able to serve this up and see it in a browser. Light server. Hey, there's window blinds. And if I take a look at this network tab again and refresh, go to that localhost thing, take a look at the response. Hey, that's kind of like the thing that I wrote. It's the contents of the file. There's also some other shit there. That's the light server thing. Don't worry about it. Cool. Next thing, let's see how CSS fits into this. So add a CSS file up here in the head. We're going to make a link, rel style sheet, and then you don't need to put the dot slash in there. Like that. That is going to link a style sheet to this document. Let's prove it. If I light server that, Hey, take a look at that. Ooh, I got 404'd. I was having this problem with Chrome yesterday. Let's see what's happening here. Weird. All right, let's so this is a new Chrome thing that just started happening. I want to see if I can fix it. Let's troubleshoot this together. So it refused to apply the style from app.css because its MIME type, text HTML, is not a supported style sheet MIME type, and strict MIME checking is enabled. Can anybody tell me what a MIME type is? Just happen to know. MIME types are a good thing to know. So a MIME type, it stands for like multimedia, internet media extension. That doesn't matter. But it's this system of categorizing files. So it always is a big thing slash a little thing. So it's a category and then a specific type. So text slash HTML is a file type. Text slash style sheet is another file type. Image slash JPEG, that's a MIME type. Image slash PNG, it's a MIME type. That's a way to identify different types of files. So my hunch is that I need to explicitly state the type here. And say that it's text style sheet. Let's see if it'll let me do that. Nope, still. Okay, there's that one. All right, it's not mad about the MIME type anymore. It's still 404ing though. How strange. Let's look at the root maybe. Well, shoot, that didn't ask for it at all. All right, Chrome can fuck off. Let's do this in Firefox. Yeah, you know, like that. That's how it's supposed to work. All right. Take a look at this in the network tab. So we asked for this document. We got it back. We look at the response. Hey, it's kind of like that document that we wrote. It hits this link tag here and goes, oh, I need to ask for another file. And then does it immediately. Gets it back here. If we put something in that, like, do we have an H1 in there? I'm going to say its color is red. Oop, was that an H1? Thought it was an H1. It is. Why isn't it reddening it? Man, I'm having a day. Ah, that's why. It's text CSS, not text style sheet. That's what I get for trying to force the MIME type on it. All right, there we go. And there's our red text. So we asked for the document, then the document asked for the style sheet. We got this back, and it's applying it to this HTML. So that's where we're at, big picture. Questions?
Totally unrelated to CSS, but could I request a lesson in DevTools for tomorrow?
Yeah.
My network tab looks nothing like yours.
Sure, no problem.
This is not that related, but what is the favicon.ico thing that I see all the time?
Anybody know?
It's a little image that appears up in the tab in the browser.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. So yeah, if we go over to Google, that little G up in the corner, that is the favicon. Your browser automatically asks for it. It doesn't break anything if it doesn't have it, but yeah, it's 404ing there because we don't have one. Check this out though. I can just put a favicon in there. It doesn't even need to be real, and it won't 404 anymore. So I could say touch favicon.ico, serve it up. There you go, 200'd. What else? Cool. So CSS is hard. It's simple, but it's not easy. There are a couple different areas of CSS, but not that many of them, like 6, I think. It has a very consistent logic within itself, but it's very different than programming logic. So this has led to, let's see, pull up the CSS GIFs. Everybody loves the old Peter Griffin one. Or people like CSS is awesome. Programmers have historically hated CSS. CSS is dog shit, stupid language, doesn't make any fucking sense. It does. I'm telling you right now, it has a very consistent internal logic to it, but you got to invest some time in figuring it out. So let's talk about the different categories of things that we have in CSS. So over here, first of all, I'll put this on this line. That's called a selector. I have a couple different kinds of selectors. That one's a tag selector. There's also class selectors, ID selectors. You can have more than one. So we can have some class and another class. We can use multiple selectors to kind of make a compound selector. So for example, if I don't have the comma there, I want whatever element has a class of some nested class, but it needs to be inside of something called with a class of some class. You can also make that even more specific. That would be, I want every element that has a class of some nested class, and its immediate parent, nothing in between, needs to be something with a class of some class. We got a variety of these things. We can do things that are adjacent to each other. You can't, ironically, select the other direction. You can't say something that has a child with some property to it. We can even do some pretty cool things like something that has some class and is the second child of its parent. So, but all of these are about targeting elements. What is the element and what do you want to do to it? So this is the element, it's the selector we're using. And then that's called a rule. We can have as many rules as we want. All of these are rules that we are applying to that selector. Questions?
Can you refresh your browser page so we can see it?
Oh, sure. Pew! It's got a little blue border. It's got some padding inside of it. It's got red text. What else? Some of the CSS stuff people generally don't struggle with. Among those, mentioned there's like a couple different categories of things we talk about in CSS. Color, that's one of those. So we have a couple different ways we can do color. What you'll see if you go through basically any CSS tutorial is hex. So that's anything that looks like that. Right, yeah. 6 hexadecimal characters. So that's 0 through 9 and then A through F. You can also use words for like really common colors, like I was just doing. Call that purple or orange or whatever. That works too. If I could have you learn one way of doing colors though, I'd have you learn a lesser known color thing called HSL. HSL stands for hue, saturation, lightness. Hue, this is what you would like generally refer to as the color. Green, blue, red, something like that. Saturation is a scale. Super saturated is Ronald McDonald, Barney the Dinosaur. Super desaturated is grayscale, black and white. Low saturation is like pastels. High saturation is like rich colors. So we say how saturated something is. Lightness is a scale from white to black. 100% is white, 0% is black. And so we can lighten colors or darken colors. So something with, let's red with a lot of lightness in it comes out pink. Something that's red with a lot of darkness in it comes like blood red.
Are those number values?
Yes. So hue is 360 degrees. Hue is 0 is red, 360 is red. And otherwise it goes red, green, blue. So that's red, that's green, that's blue. Let's say I want to do green. So I say, all right, I want that. I want half saturation and half lightness. Let's see what that looks like.
I've seen with an A. What does the A do?
A is the alpha channel. So you can also, you can add a fourth value to it, which is transparency, if you want it to be see-through. Okay, so there's the green. So I have that HSL there. If I, okay, so I'm gonna slam up on this and watch it rotate through hues while keeping the same saturation and lightness. So what's cool about this is it gets really easy to do mental math on colors. You can't do that with hex. Nobody can do that with hex. But if I want, give me some blue. All right, well, let's start with 240. All right, maybe like a little bit less purple, a little bit more aqua. So you go, okay, well, how about I just knock that down a little bit? All right, it's getting a little bit more aqua. Never mind, I want it to be actually purple. All right, well, let's go between, there we go, purple. Really easy to do some mental color math with that. If we go back to the blue, what if I play with the saturation on that? Super saturated. There we go. There's that like 1998 internet look. And then you can totally desaturate it and you can see it starts getting a little bit more pastel. And then eventually just becomes gray. Okay, if I reset the saturation on that and go with the lightness, that's all white. That's all black. And we can do everything in between. Anywhere you can use a color in CSS, you can use HSL. And I'd recommend that you do. You're not going to find that in any tutorials online, but so much easier for human brains.
I'm sorry, Kyle, you cut out for just a little bit there when you were talking about tutorials online.
Oh yeah, no like CSS for beginners tutorial will tell you to use HSL. I'm telling you to use it. It's easier, so much easier than hex.
So is there a reference that you particularly like that I could read over or we could read over?
Yeah, I would go to the MDN reference for basically anything web. So MDN HSL. Color. Using the HSL cylindrical coordinate system. And there you go. And I'll tell you all about it.
Very cool, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions about colors?
I have a question, but it has nothing to do with CSS. My NPM is kind of acting up. I can't turn on the light server at all. Something is going on.
Let's touch base after this. Might be a node installation issue.
Also unrelated to CSS, but we all installed, I think, Light Server globally. Is there any sort of security concern with that because it's a MDN package?
Nope, that's fine. As long as you didn't sudo install it.
No, no.
Good.
Kyle, how did you fix it where your CSS wasn't showing up? You went to Mozilla? 'Cause mine's not.
Yeah, I'm just using Firefox instead. I got to figure out what's going on with Chrome. So Chrome does rolling releases. There's a new version of Chrome every 6 weeks. And the new version started forking those CSS files because of the MIME type. So I'm going to dig into that and figure out what's going on.
Weird. That's totally weird because mine's working just fine. Have y'all updated?
You might not have like installed the new update.
Okay. Well, I just did update it. It's not showing that there's anything newer than what I've got at the moment.
I'll get to the bottom of it.
That's bizarre.
Okay, another thing in CSS that people generally don't struggle with too much, but I want to give you a quick overview is size units. So I'm telling you, by and large, you should probably be using HSL for your colors. For your sizes, we got a couple options. We can do things in pixels, like that. But that's not the only unit we can do. We can also do percentages. It's a percentage of your parent. So if your parent's width is 100 pixels, then 10%, you're saying I want 10 pixels all around. Always goes off of the width. And in general, that's a rule in CSS. If we're talking about how big something is, we're always talking about its width. One that you'll see plenty of is ems and its close cousin, rems. Anybody know what an em is? It's a design term.
An M is like the different sizes that a font has, right?
It's based on the font. Based on what in the font? It's based on the width of the capital letter M. Capital M is the widest letter in every font. So we can use that as a unit in CSS. And that ends up working out really well because, believe it or not, design it's not art. It's not creative expression. You don't do it with a beret. You do it with a ruler. It's a set of principles, just like programming, that we're using to solve problems. And one of them is trying to keep all the various sizes in our app harmonious. They should have some kind of relationship with each other. And so using these M units, that helps us stay balanced on that. I can go, all right, I want the padding on this element to be 2 times the width of the characters in my font. Now they have a relationship with each other. A rem is a root M. This is always relative to the current font size. This is relative to whatever the top level font size is for the entire document. There's a couple others too, but if these are the only ones you know probably what 95% of CSS devs know.
So
go ahead.
Wouldn't using rem be more consistent?
It would. However, you also run into the issue where like what inevitably happens when you start working with rems a lot is it's never like one rem or two rems or whatever. It always ends up being like 2.45 rems. And now it's hard to say that we actually have like a relationship happening there. But yeah, rems are the exact same throughout the document, which makes them really nice. But if I want my padding or whatever to be relative to whatever thing that I'm styling, like a heading or something, you can make a pretty good argument for M being a greater choice.
How do pixels relate to font size?
So pixels are not related to your font size. Like they're either literal or logical pixels. Logical pixels, like starting about 10 years ago, we started getting these high DPI screens. And so a lot of cases you say pixel, but it's actually 2 pixels for those. But this is an absolute unit. It will always be 12 pixels. Say that your font size is 16 pixels, and you can establish relationships there, but it stays the same always. And this can be a problem. Let's check this out. If I say that the padding is 12 pixels here, actually, I'm gonna throw a border on that too. Put a red border like that. If I serve that up, all right, gorgeous. So this has a 12 pixel padding. Cool. Let's see what happens when this font gets bigger. Font size, 16 pixels. All right, as the font size goes up, that padding stays the same.
Mm-hmm.
And now it looks really cramped and shit. Oh, well, now it looks really spacious. Now, if I did that with M's, all right. Now, as the font gets bigger, padding gets bigger too. Maintains its proportion. In general, you'll find that like any kind of proportionate unit, like percentages, M's, or whatever, tends to work a lot better on mobile. I'm not going to say that you should never use pixels. There's actually very good use cases for pixels. But most of the time, you're better off reaching for some proportional element. Cool. So what I want you to do is for 5 minutes, just play around with a little bit. Play around with HSL colors. Play around with the different sizing units. If you can't get Light Server up and running, pro tip, you can just open DevTools on any web page and start playing around in the styles area here. Just click on an element, go over to its styles, works in Chrome or Firefox, and just, you can add stuff, you can delete stuff, you can change stuff, be a hacker. 5 minutes, play around with sizes and colors.
Kyle, on the HSL, like the colors thing, how did you get that to go where you could just like push the arrow up or down and it would change your color?
Click on like one of the numbers like this, and then just use your up and down arrows. That should also work in any browser.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, click a unit and then up and down. All right. Any questions come up while you were working with sizes and colors?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there a way to make the border like fit to the text? Because as the page gets bigger, the border goes all the way across, but the text stays over there.
Oh, interesting. So, yes, we're going to talk about that next. That's getting into the harder parts of CSS. But yes.
Cool.
What else?
I could make it work on 2 pages, but then when I tried it on Google, it didn't work.
Like you went to the Google website and tried to change the styles?
Yeah.
So what's hard about doing it on an existing site is you may or may not have other styles that you're fighting with. Let's give it a shot. If I go over here, if you apply whatever styles you want directly to the element, nothing else can override it. So that helps. If I say font size is 2 Ms, all right, it's getting a little bit bigger. We can set the color if we want. It's going to be green. And I can rotate through the hues and what have you.
Yeah, I didn't specify the exact element. That's what it was.
There you go. Other questions that came up? All right. So, mentioned that size and color, these aren't like too terribly hard. There is something that is hard in CSS, and that is positioning. So, there are 2 like related activities that I want you guys to do to really like drill this one in. But briefly, yeah, this box goes all the way across the screen, even though the text is only this big. This is because an H1 by default is a block level element. In classic CSS, there's 2 kinds of elements: inline elements, block elements. A block element tries to take up the entire width of its container. If that's body or something, tries to take up the entire thing. If that's a smaller box or something, it's going to try to take up the whole box. Block level elements try to take up as much space as possible horizontally.
Hello, this is Elise.
An inline element only takes up as much space as its content. Block level, inline. So if I make, so this will be kind of interesting. If I make this inline, it's not going to take up the entire width of the page anymore. Something else interesting is going to happen though. Display inline. Oh, never mind. I kept the border. Shouldn't have kept the border. But now it's only going to the content.
So is your top border like hidden because of the padding pushing it out of the screen?
It shouldn't do that either. I wonder if I change it to inline block if it fixes that. Yeah, there you go. That's what it's supposed to do. Inline block. Inline block. So that other one, inline block, only takes up as much space as the content, but we still have the box model. So box model is the last thing we're going to talk about in this lesson. And here it is right down here. Box model works like this. For block elements and inline block elements, we have the content. This has width and it has height. Surrounding the content is padding. So when you're adding rules for padding, it's around the content. Around the padding is the border. So if you have a 1 pixel border, well, then it's 1 pixel from here to here. With 30 pixel border, it's 30 pixels from here to here. And then finally, outside of all of it, is margin. With the height and width of the content, surrounded by padding, which is surrounded by a border, which is surrounded by the margin. Most common confusion with the box model is, like, if we don't have a border, if this is 0 pixels, well, then what's padding and what's margin? Your cheat sheet on that is that if you were going to put a background color on something, whether or not it has it, if you were going to put a background color on something, it would be in the padding, it would not be in the margin. Another way to think of that, margin pushes elements away from each other. Padding gives something breathing room. So back to the code. Let's say I make another one of these. I can say that this one should have a margin left of 3 ems. Oops, margin right. And it pushes that second element away from it. But you see there's still all that same breathing room around the window blinds between the content and the border still has that padding in there. If I want to make other elements GTF away from it, that's margin. And collectively, that's called the box model. Every block element has the box model. Inline elements don't. You can't set the width of an inline element, which would make sense. Inline elements are like paragraphs and stuff. You want to set the width of letters with that? Wouldn't make any sense. So instead, if I have something that I need to do that with, like this, I can say inline block, which means it's an inline element, but I want it to have the box model. And if this has the box model on it, say CSS is awesome. It has the box model. That means that I can set a width. And there you go. Cool. So that's the box model. There are two other things that you really need to know about positioning to be successful with CSS. The first one is Flexbox. Second one is Grid. If you only learn one of them, learn Flexbox. Grid might come in handy too. And there are two resources that you can use for those. Both of them are on the Flatiron site. First one is called Flexbox Froggy. The second one is called Grid Garden. They're games. And you get through all 24 of these, you're going to get a pretty good idea of how Flexbox works. But keep in mind that like old-timey CSS, inline and block, that's all we had for like over a decade. All of this HTML and CSS shit was just for documents, sharing like research papers and stuff. And part of that was we never got to control the vertical axis. You want more vertical whatever, you just write more content. It wouldn't make any sense in the context of a research paper to control your vertical. Now we start making apps, then we absolutely want to have a little bit more control over the vertical space. So that's where Flexbox and Grid come in. They give us that control, but they're a little bit trickier to figure out. So what I'd like you to do is spend some time Flexbox froggying. If you get through that and you're just champing at the bit for more, do Grid Garden. It's made by the same people, but those are like two modern grown-up tools for doing positioning in CSS. What questions do you have? Cool. Have a good lunch. Go learn some stuff.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Kyle.
Yep.
I have something kind of like a personal issue.